more information about abuse, if you're wondering if you're in an abusive situation, don't hesitate to ask questions. All of it can be anonymous, so no one has to know. Not even the person that you're with can know that you are seeking help or just finding out if that is actually happening in your situation. Either way, I do encourage you to know. Knowing is half the battle, and then you can do something about it if you do so choose. So I hope you do, but I don't want to put that on yourself. First step is just finding out and recognizing that you are in an abusive situation. I hope this video was helpful to you. Please share this video, encourage others who may be in abusive situations to get the help that they need, that they're not alone as their abusers would want them to think. Yeah, so that's all I got for today. I hope this video was helpful to you. I hope it blesses someone else out there. I'm Rashonda Carey. I'm a licensed therapist, and here on Undefined Therapy, I create mental health videos to help you create your own path toward health.
I always feel like guilty skipping past people's people talking about themselves. I was like, should I pause it here? But I think anytime we feature content from other creators on this channel, it always feels like the right thing to do to let them talk about their channel and that sort of thing. So by all means, if you vibe with her videos, feel free to drop her a follow. So that's a little bit about the types of abuse, of which she listed 6. Again, traditionally, probably would think of them about 4, but there's been, you know, the verbal, and she didn't necessarily mention emotional. Sometimes verbal and emotional get lumped into the same category. Though I'd say something like stonewalling is the absence of speaking, and I'd say stonewalling is the type of emotional abuse. But if you could say the absence of speaking counts as verbal abuse, then I don't know. So the categories can be a little bit ill-defined at times, but I think she does a great job of talking about each one here. So the next video that we're going to watch is a little bit of talking about the signs of abuse. And again, this is Katie Morton. Katie Morton's awesome. She's huge out there for those of you who are not in the know about her mental health stuff. I gotta always like people's stuff right as we watch it here, or else I feel guilty. She's awesome. She's a marriage and family therapist. She's been a creator around mental health topics on YouTube for a long time. So she really needs no introduction. But this video, even though she only talks about it in terms of emotional, mental, and physical abuse, and kind of neglects some of the other ones, she does a really good job about talking about the cycle of abuse and what that looks like. There's very defined patterns that these things look like. So if you recognize this cycle in your own life with maybe family or friends or someone you're in a romantic relationship with, consider getting help if you feel like you're the victim, or if you're one of the perpetrators or the sole perpetrator. Consider, seeking help from a therapist or a mental health coach, and trying to work on your stuff. It's totally all right to have trauma. It's not okay to use that as justification to abuse other people. I actually posted a thing on my thread about that. I think it was this morning. So this morning that I posted that. Maybe that was yesterday. So I've been kind of thinking about this stuff a lot lately as I continue to learn and increase my mental health knowledge myself.
Abuse is often...
Oops. Sorry, I was going to remember to...
misunderstood, and people can assume that those in abusive relationships knew they were going to be that way from the beginning. But most people don't know about the cycle of abuse or what narcissistic abuse looks like, which is why today I want to talk about the cycle of abuse, why we can get stuck in it, why it's so stigmatized, and what we can do to free ourselves. If you're new here, my name is Katie Morton. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I talk about abuse, trauma, eating disorders, depression, all things mental health related. So if you'd like to subscribe, we would love to have you. I promise you will always leave with some helpful information for you or for someone that you love. And so
I will say, by all means, subscribe to Katie Morton, because she's awesome. Her content's like, she's got topics about everything under the sun at this point. So even though she's just like, I just specialize in, eating disorders and what, she's got videos about everything. She's great.
Subscribing really helps creators keep
doing what we do. We love us some Katie Morton on this channel.
Let's jump into this topic. The cycle of abuse was a theory that was developed in 1979 by Lenore Walker. And what you should know about it is it's a cycle, so it's a circle. And briefly, I'm going to explain to you how it works. Now, there's this tension building phase, and that's actually the longest phase, because this is when we feel like we're walking on eggshells.
And before she dives in, we'll talk a little bit about it. So yeah, so what she's referring to is what's called the different things. Sometimes cycle of abuse, sometimes called the cycle of violence. I was actually trained on recognizing this when I worked in the mental health industry. And so again, they kind of have historically only recognized physical and sexual, but it's true for all of them. Let's see. No, that's not the those are the signs. Where's the abuse here? Yeah, so cycle of abuse here. So you've got this tension building phase. This is actually the exact infographic that I learned many years ago. That's actually really funny. So tension building is this sense of walking on eggshells, breakdowns in communication, just kind of feeling this anxiety and this pit in your stomach when you're around this person. Lord knows I've been there before. And then typically there's some kind of incident that sets off the abuse, right? Whether it's verbal, emotional, physical. Maybe you came home late. Maybe you walked your dirty shoes across the carpet. Maybe you forgot to take out the dishes. And again, keep in mind, this could be whether we're talking about a intimate relationship, family relationship, friendship, whatever, right? Because all of those types of relationships can potentially be abusive. And so this characteristic cycle is going to be characteristic of pretty much all of them. So tension building followed by some incident. You get into an argument and it escalates, right? You forget your friend's birthday and they go off on you. You don't take out the trash and dad, gets physical, right? Typically afterwards, there's a reconciliation where the abuser apologizes, they're making excuses, maybe they blame the victim. And this can be really tricky sometimes too. This gets really complicated because sometimes you can be in a relationship with an abusive person, especially if it's something like a narcissist or even just an emotionally immature person. We've had a stream about emotional immaturity before, so if you're watching and you're not familiar with what that is, feel free to check out the replay of the stream. But often, if you're in a relationship with a narcissist or an emotionally abusive person, you can be the victim of abuse and you'll end up being the one apologizing, and that can make it really complicated sometimes to figure out, like, wait, what is going on here? I don't understand. That's when we get into a little bit of a discussion about trauma bonds. So but yeah, so typically in the classical case, the person who's abusive apologizes. Again, if this is mutual abuse that we're talking about, which I get is a contentious subject, then maybe both people apologize regardless. There's a reconciliation, right? Sometimes there can be some victim blaming. Well, I wouldn't have acted like that if you hadn't have pushed me to it. You just kept pushing me, and then I just had to lash out, if you would have just taken out the damn dishes, that can be a thing sometimes in these cases. So reconciliation of some sort, even if there's some victim blaming or denial of, well, you pushed me to it. And then there's typically this like calm period. If it's a romantic relationship, it'll go back to like a honeymoon phase where you're like, oh my God, this person's the love of my life and this relationship's great and I'm going to marry them. And so there's a calm that sets in, but it's an uneasy, or it's an impermanent kind of calm, right? Eventually it goes back to the tension building. Like, oh, I said something and now they're a little bit agitated. Oh, let me just walk around on eggshells around them for a little while. And then the abusive person snaps and repeats all over again. And again, this is the same cycle that occurs whether it's single perpetrator abusive relationship or mutual abuse, right? Some people will talk about reactive abuse versus mutual abuse, but if we're talking about the classical definition, which is just a solo perpetrator, there's one bad guy and one good guy, which again, I hate that. I hate that label. Unless the person's literally a narcissist or a sociopath, there's never just one person that's all good or one person that's all bad. But again, if we're talking about the classical definition, this is the cycle. That's what it looks like. Tension building, incident, reconciliation, and calm. So, but Hugh Morton will talk about it a little bit more.
Trying not to upset them, trying not to cause the abuse to happen again. And it will build and build and build and build until we reach the precipice and the incident occurs, which is when the abuse happens. Okay, so something happens, they've harmed us in some way. Let's say we're in a domestic violence type of situation. So let's say my partner hits me. So that incident happens. And then immediately we fall into what's known as the reconciliation or honeymoon period, where, oh, he says, I'm so sorry, it'll never happen again, and maybe make some excuses, like things just been really stressful, and I didn't realize I was under so much pressure, and I took it out on you just because I love you so much. They might even shower us with gifts or take us out to dinner, take us on dates and things like that. That's why they kind of call it this honeymoon period, right? So we've gone from tension building, incident, honeymoon period, and then the last is calm.
And so an example that I like to use, and this is not to be gendered by any means, one thing that I want to, and every now and then you'll hear people say like, oh, he'll come apologize or whatever. This is not a gendered thing by any means. Every spectrum of gender can be a perpetrator and a victim of abuse. I want to be very clear about that. It's not that you're a man, so you're a perpetrator, and you identify as a woman, so you're a victim. By no means. I think that's one thing that I feel really strongly about. When I worked in psych hospitals several years ago, I remember I had a representative from a domestic violence shelter that came, and she sat in a room that was predominantly women, but there were some men, and she gave a talk on domestic violence, and she stood up and said, domestic violence is when a man harms a woman. And she's like, although there is some percentage of women who harm men, this is overwhelmingly a male perpetrated against female issue. And she pretty much just alienated every man in that room to the point where we all went to the bathroom afterwards and just talked about how completely invalidated and unseen and villainized we felt by her. So, matter of fact, let's actually look up the domestic violence by gender. So yes, 1 in 3 women and also 1 in 4 men have experienced domestic partner violence. So this is not just this happens to women or this happens to men, or men are the perpetrators or women are the perpetrators. Affects all genders. There is some difference in the statistics though. So just wanted to take a second to make that point really clear.
As things progress, there's a lot of conversation around whether calm is a stage of it or not. And some people, it is gone. There's no calm. We go right back into tension building. But for many, there is this calm phase when things kind of return, quote unquote, back to normal. The one part that's the hardest for people to understand is how can we get stuck in this cycle, right? If I feel this tension building in my relationship and then they harm me, why wouldn't I just leave? Well, the thing that we're forgetting is that having someone we
trauma bonds. We'll talk about that next.
Hurt us really erodes at our self-esteem and our confidence. Not to mention, think of like love bombing. We've talked about love bombing in the past in relation to narcissistic abuse, and that is when someone showers us like over the top with affection, attention, words of affirmation.
And I have to admit, I debated with myself whether to even dive into the topic of abuse at all, because it's such a rabbit hole and there's so much to talk about and so much nuance and complexity in terms like love bombing and gaslighting and blame shifting and trauma bonds and mutual abuse versus reactive abuse. There's just so many things to get into. So she brings up the topic of love bombing, which she talks about in the case of a narcissist doing, but love bombing can be done by more people than just a narcissist. So we'll have to do a stream on narcissism at some point in the future. Not tonight, because that's a whole topic in itself to get into. So
affirmation, they compliment us, they give us gifts, they take us on expensive trips, they can do all of this stuff. It's a love bomb, right? It can be like a fog. We can't even see out of it. And it's done as a manipulation tactic. And that's the important key, because people can be loving and affectionate. There's nothing wrong with that. But love bombing is done so that we essentially can't see straight, and we just are so overwhelmed with all the attention, affection, the gifts, everything, that we just can't help but think that that person's amazing, right? So we can be kind of in this.
And I want to translate this a little bit here. So Katie Morton is talking about this, like, why don't people leave abusive relationships? And she brings up a good point of, like, your self-esteem can be eroded over time. And some people stay in toxic, dysfunctional relationships because over time their self-esteem gets eroded to the point where they feel like they don't deserve better, or if they leave this person, they're never going to find anybody else. Lord knows I've personally been in those situations before, or had those feelings before. She also brings up the topic of love bombing, which I'm really careful anytime anyone brings up any, like, purposely manipulative or abusive behavior, which is kind of why I wanted to talk about this topic tonight, and also didn't want to talk about it. I think it's really easy for us to stand on the outside and look at someone else's behavior and be like, you're doing this, you're even with labeling people with mental health disorders, which I'm very careful about. And most therapists, to be fair, are very hesitant to put labels on people nowadays with diagnoses, unless they have to for, like, insurance purposes. I think it's very easy to be in a relationship with someone and be like, they do behavior that I would define as abusive. It must be because they're a narcissist and they love bombed me and manipulated me and they're this evil sociopath. That is not the message that I want to give tonight. That does certainly happen. Is narcissistic personality disorder a real disorder that exists in the world? And people that are diagnosed with a disorder, can they harm other people and their intimate relationships? Yes, absolutely. That is true. Does abuse occur? Yes, absolutely does. And also, I think when it comes to things like love bombing, it's very hard to define love bombing unless you know for sure that person has a narcissistic personality disorder, because oftentimes behaviors like that, or I guess I should say that thing can look like other types of behaviors that are completely benign. So the reason I bring this up, we've talked about attachment styles many times in this stream. You know, I was going to talk about attachment styles again, didn't you? If someone, say, has an anxious attachment style, they are very characteristic, or that is commonly characterized by them just being very clingy, right? And so someone who is not anxiously attached might get into a romantic, we'll talk about specifically romantic relationships here, might get into a romantic relationship with someone and see them being clingy and be like, oh God, this person is love bombing me. It must be that they're a horrible, manipulative sociopath that's going to hurt me, and might run away in fear, right? I've literally seen some, being in the dating sphere and such, and reading a lot of those books and watching a lot of the content myself. Sometimes I see videos that are like, if the person comes on really strong at the start, then you need to run away because that means they're a narcissist for sure. And it's like, oh my God, that's horrifying advice to give to someone, because it might just be that they're anxiously attached and they're clingy. Maybe they're trying to impress you because they're really insecure. So the whole love bombing thing is a little bit of a trigger for me, because as a guy who has, has historically come up as fearful avoidant, that leans more anxiously attached. I know I've been in relationships where I've moved really fast with people, and I don't know, it feels shitty for them to be like, oh, well, you did it because you're a narcissist and you're abusive, manipulative. It's like, no, someone can just be insecure and trying really hard to impress you is the point that I'm trying to make with all this. So anyway, lots of interesting stuff to dive into, and when it comes to toxic relationships and abuse. So we might do another 2-part stream on this someday. We'll see.
Fog, not able to see clearly. And then when that person that we think loved us so dearly harms us, we can believe them when they say it won't happen again. Or we can think that we've done something wrong, right? And as this abuse continues, it slowly erodes at our self-esteem and our confidence. If we grew up in an abusive...
And again, I think this is a little bit of a naive take. Again, I think this comes from a very classical, and as a therapist, with her being a therapist, sometimes it's a little bit of disappointing to hear takes like this from people that are actual licensed professionals. Which is why, you know, some therapists can be not the greatest therapist. I mean, I think Katie Morton's great, but I find this particular take by her a little bit disappointing. Again, unless someone's actually a narcissist or a sociopath, I don't know many people who truly enjoy harming others, right? And so I think when you have these cycles of someone doing abusive behavior and then coming in and promising not to do it, you know, the way that she's kind of portraying it here is the person's doing it like duplicity. How do I want to say it? They're doing it with bad intentions, right? To try to lull you into a false sense of security so they can abuse you again, right? I think that's a little bit of a black and white way of looking at people. I don't necessarily share there's views that like all, you know, there's evil people that are abusers and then there's the rest of us. They're all good, perfect little angels. I think that's a really naive way of looking at people. I think the reality is probably, even if someone is in a relationship where the one person's a solo perpetrator of abuse, I think that person may very well like truly mean that they don't want to perpetrate again, right? But it's also completely possible with that person's trauma, their wounds, any psychological disorders or personality disorders that they may have, and their current ability to cope with stress, communicate in interpersonal relationships, and what else, that might really just be the best that they're capable of at that time, right? And that doesn't mean that we have to stay in those situations. If we are being harmed by another person, by all means. But yeah, I feel like I often see these takes online by sometimes even actual therapists, but also very commonly people that have been the victims of abuse, or even past perpetrators sometimes, where they're like, oh yeah, there's just this one evil sociopath that's manipulating you and is abusing you, and they tell you they're not going to do it again, but really, you know, they're crying crocodile tears because they can't wait to get you back in their clutches so they can do it all over again. And I just think that's a really naive way of looking at human beings. So just wanting to add a little bit of nuance into her interpretation here.
Of home, we're almost used to this cycle and that tension building feeling, and even though it might be, or it is unhealthy, but it might be comfortable to us, right? And so we can find ourselves in those patterns.
I think this is a good point though. Oftentimes people who wind up in toxic or dysfunctional relationships, for whatever reason, some part of them feels like a comfort and familiarity in being in that chaotic cycle, right? A lot of us are addicted to chaotic relationships, and because of that, even though we don't necessarily consciously want to be in a toxic relationship, subconsciously there's a part of us that feels normal and familiar to us, and so that could be a major reason of why we stay sometimes.
Of behavior, finding,
or even why we perpetuate abuse sometimes, right? Because we're used to being in chaos, and so if we get bored, you know, this is a thing that some people assert that people do. Like, I feel like it's a thing that you hear women do sometimes, again, not to be gendered, but I just hear about it more online of like, oh, when I get bored, I start conflict just to keep things interesting or whatever, you know. Again, it's a little bit of a it's a bad take, but you kind of hear that stuff floating around sometimes online. So yeah, I mean, yeah, so sometimes I think the addiction to chaos can cause people to stay stuck in these situations, whether as perpetrator or a victim, or as, you know, a mutual perpetrator.
The same relationships that we honestly tried to probably get away from growing up. And I also want to mention that a lot of times when we're in these types of abusive relationships, they will try to isolate us from our friends and family. A lot of times they'll tell us they don't have your best interest in heart, or they'll bring up like an old hurt because you've told them about something maybe a friend said or did, or a family member, you know, didn't show up for me and it really hurt my feelings. They'll use these secrets or past events as like weapons so that you end up without anybody around you and are fully dependent upon them. Now, being in an abusive relationship, unfortunately, is incredibly stigmatized. Now, I know a lot of you are thinking, what? That doesn't make any sense. But just take a minute with me. Consider what you would think if one of your close friends came to you and told you that they were in an abusive relationship. What would your reaction be? What if they then told you that they love that person, they weren't ready to leave them? Would you judge them? You might. And I think a lot of us don't recognize the assumptions that we make about these types of situations because we haven't been in them ourselves and we don't know what it's like to have.
Yeah. Man, I have like 20 thoughts in regards to this comment that she's making. I might be wrong, but if I had to guess, I would wager that Katie Morton's probably never been in an abusive relationship before. So again, I feel like she has, kind of like a, if you learn this from a textbook in grad school kind of opinion of things. I might be wrong. Could totally be wrong, but let's see. What was she saying? She said something really good here
about these types of situations because
I think oftentimes we get in these relationships and there's like a shame associated with it of why we tend to isolate ourselves. So, I'm sure there's probably situations again where there is an abuser and they are nefarious and they are attempting to isolate you from your friends and family. It's totally probably possible. And also, I think just a common part of it is there's like a shame, right? Because no one wants to feel unsuccessful in their relationships. No one wants to be like, man, I really like this person, but I'm stuck in a toxic, shitty relationship. And like, I don't know how to talk about how disappointed I am with my family and friends about it, So I think that's one thing to bring up. Also, I liked how that she brought up a point about family. Going back to the addiction to chaos thing that I mentioned a second ago, often we wind up in these types of relationships because we ourselves as children experienced our parents having those types of relationships, right? So if your parents were in an abusive relationship with each other, quite often we'll see that, and subconsciously, maybe consciously we know that was a messed up situation, but subconsciously we'll develop the belief that, that's what love is. Love is when you fight all the time. You show each other you love each other by fighting, right? And subconsciously you develop that belief, and then you go out in the world and you find partners to recreate that dynamic with. So I think she brings up a lot of good points.
We haven't been in them ourselves and we don't know what it's like to have someone that we care for deeply, who we think cares for us deeply, harm us. That type of pain and kind of like incongruence, right? Like things aren't making sense. It just doesn't make sense, right? We have that cognitive dissonance. It's just like battling it out. It can be hard for us to see straight, and we can believe them when they say they won't do it again. So just pay attention and be aware of the fact that when someone is in an abusive situation, it's not because they want to be. It's not that they made this choice. They found themselves in this situation and they don't know how to get out. Because I hear all the time people saying, oh, I would never let that happen to me. Or like, they just must be so weak. I've even heard some of my friends say, like, if someone ever laid a hand on me, I would make them rue the day, right? We don't quite understand how they feel. We don't know what's really going on. So just consider.
I think the reality is, I think that's a pog take here. I think it is super easy to sit as a bystander on the outside and look at someone else who's caught in an abusive, dysfunctional relationship, or I guess I should say abusive and or toxic relationship. They're pretty much interchangeable, right? And be like, oh, that would never happen to me. The moment that happened to me, I would walk, until you actually end up in one and you're in love with somebody and, there's abuse going on and it's a toxic relationship, right? Then it actually becomes a lot fucking harder to walk away from someone that you love. So I think that's a great take by her.
Or any assumptions or judgments that you might have around abuse.
What's up, Flame? How's your night going, man? I know, right? Heavy topics tonight. It's an important topic, though. I feel like I wanted to talk about it, so very true, man. I think I need a therapist. What's up, dude? Yeah, I mean, it's a heavier topic, but I feel like the difficult stuff is a big part of the reason why I love being in the field in the first place. I feel like it's this stuff that's the stuff that's hard to talk about, that's often so meaningful and so important to talk about, right? So welcome in, man. We got Alpha and Flame in the house. Well, Good. We'll have to do some games to lighten the mood and detox from all the seriousness here a little bit later tonight. Also, I totally was on super late today. Sorry, y'all. I forgot to apologize at the beginning of the stream. I was like a little late. We won't say how late I was for stream, but welcome in, guys. Good to have you. Lots to talk about, but I wouldn't want to trauma dump Law. I mean, you're totally in a safe space, man. So you're always free to share as much as you like. But yeah, I get, sometimes chat, it's like hard to, because I know I'm in this situation, especially with talking about this kind of stuff. For me, I'm like very conscious of like, okay, how much am I sharing about my own personal life, and am I respecting the privacy of other people that have been in my life? And Lord knows I've been in toxic and or abusive dynamics and under all, family and friends and, all sorts of stuff. So, seen it, lived it, and got the t-shirt for all of this stuff. So by no means am I sitting up on a pedestal and be like, this is what this looks like. These people are demons. It's like, yeah, you say that until it's like your dad, and then you're like, okay. Harder to villainize people that you know and love, right? So, but yeah, welcome in, man. You're always welcome to share whatever you'd like. This is a safe space here. And you don't have to worry about trauma dumping, man. You're among friends here. I care about what you have to say.
Or someone who's been in an abusive situation, because if someone does decide to share what they're going through, that's a huge step. And what we need to meet them with is, I'm so sorry. It can be really fucking hard to talk about. How can I help? So just try to be aware and then offer your assistance however they need it. And finally, and arguably most importantly, how do we free ourselves from this situation if we find ourselves in it? And the first is to make a plan and do so as safely as possible. Don't write it down and put it somewhere where they could find it. Don't keep it on your phone in a place where they can just tap and open it. We want to make sure that as we put these plans in motion, that it's done safely and securely.